Alex, do you fall asleep to Dr. Brovkin's videos or just mine?
No, just yours.
Donald Trump has given Vladimir Putin an ultimatum. You better stop this war by June. That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Thank you again. Please like, comment, subscribe, and give us a thumbs up. And you'll find all the links for the guests in the description below. Hey, Vlad. Hey, Alex. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Vlad,
you.
thank you so much for coming back. This is your third of many, many times to come on this channel.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, it's Monday, the 9th of February. It's your first time meeting Alex Krainer. And I think I'm going to start with you because you are an expert on Russian issues. And so Putin has given this ultimatum to Trump. No, Trump has given this ultimatum.
Yeah.
The other way around. That's right. Sorry, I don't listen to myself. Trump has given this ultimatum to Putin that the Ukraine-Russia war must end by June. Okay. Well, that's that then, isn't it? It'll be over by June. Do you want to take it away with that?
All right. Well, let me put it like this. It's useless to give ultimatums to Putin. It doesn't work that way. Moreover, if you present it like this to the Russian public, the chances are that it would be rejected just because it's this word, ultimatum. So that's not the kind of talk that Putin or the Russian public likes, that somebody's talking to them in terms of ultimatums. But basically, it's okay. I mean, it's possible that they would agree by June, provided there are all sorts of other conditions that are met. And if they're not met, then Russia or Putin, or in this case, it's the same thing, they wouldn't accept it. Now, the conditions are, let me explain why, and then I really want to hear Alex. The reason is that Putin now is probably in a most dangerous situation that he ever faced inside Russia, because when they criticize him from the left, like the communists and the liberals and Navalny types and others, that these are not relevant. Nobody supports them. 5%, 10% intellectuals, pro-Western remnants. But if he's criticized from the nationalists, who say we have lost 115,000 Russian soldiers, and we want to achieve all the goals that you, Mr. Putin, have defined in 2022, which is demilitarization, denazification, which means change of government. And louder and louder, you can hear voices saying, we cannot have any accords, anything signed at all with not just Zelensky, but this system, this government installed by the CIA and the MI5 and all the others. So now, it's not a matter of just withdrawing the troops from Donbass. That's not good enough. Moreover, even Odessa and Kharkiv is not good enough. Now, more and more loudly, Russian media, generals, observers, Solovyov and others are demanding capitulation, basically takeover of Kiev, and installing a government that would be friendly to Russia. As Medvedev put it in his last big interview to Reuters, he said, Russia cannot afford to have any threat ever coming from Kiev. So how is he going to square it with Trump's, deal that there will be this government in Kiev, that there will be, Zelensky regime who will have rare earth minerals delivered to Americans, and BlackRock is going to continue to exploit Ukrainian lands. And what about the Russian language and Russian Orthodox Church? If Putin doesn't deliver those, well, I don't think he will be overthrown. But as one general put it, in one of the discussions I heard, is there may be turmoil in the armed forces. So that's why I say it's like dangerous. I think, Putin is firmly in control, and I don't think there's any danger, but it's difficult, to now make another Minsk 3 or 4 or whatever it is. So this is why he wants to continue dialogue with Trump. Trump is his trump card in dealing with the West. But on the other hand, he must deliver to those in Russia who say we must meet all our goals in this war. That's the problem.
Wow, thank you. Alex?
Well, with regards to Putin's, Trump's ultimatum to Putin, I don't read it that way at all. I read it more as a Trump's ultimatum to Zelensky because he cannot give an ultimatum to Putin. I don't think he's dumb enough to think that. But politically, I think it's more advantageous for him to grandstand as giving ultimatums to Putin. But this is a very clear signal to the Ukrainian side that they cannot count on any support from the United States past a certain point, because it's the Ukrainians who are dragging their feet through these negotiations and who are trying to obstruct the negotiations in every way possible. So it's a signal to them: if you haven't signed something, if you haven't come to terms with Russia by June, you're on your own. So he has no way to punish Russia for not complying, but he has ways. He has leverage over Ukraine for sure. So, I think it's always important to keep in mind that when Trump says things publicly, that he's speaking mostly to domestic audiences. The relationship between the United States and Russia is extremely important, but not just for Putin. It's also extremely important for Trump. And so by extension, I think this is also a signal to the Europeans that, they too, as supporters of war in Ukraine, are going to find themselves on their own with no support from the United States. So, we see the Ukrainian pretty much implementing the British playbook, where they negotiate and then they attempt to assassinate people with whom they negotiate. Israel's doing the same thing, Ukrainians are doing the same thing, but it's a British playbook. That's how they conduct foreign policy. And as I read the larger strategic picture, I think the ultimate enemy is the city of London. I always come back to that, but I think that the farther we observe the events as they unfold, the more convinced I become of that. And then, with regards to Putin's position at home, I'm not all that worried, because I would say that he's already faced this kind of pressure, maybe even worse, in 2014, because at that time, the Russian public was very strongly inclined for Russia to intervene in Ukraine and to march into Donbass and protect the people of Donbass, and Putin didn't do it. And it cost him very, very dearly in terms of political support. You can even look at the curve of his approval rating, and then there's another statistics that they call whether they ask Russian people whether you trust Putin. So there's like whether you approve of his performance, whether you trust him. Both of those took a nosedive, like a sharp, not into the, but it went from maybe high 80s into low 70s. The biggest drop since he's been president. And at that time, the Russian media lambasted him mercilessly. Even some of these journalists that are very close to Putin were accusing him of betraying the Russians in Ukraine. He held the course. I think he knew why, and he survived. The reason why, I think, is because probably they judged in the Kremlin that they were not ready for a confrontation with the West. It took them time to build up not only ways to be resistant to sanctions, alternatives to SWIFT and all this, but also to further cultivate the relationships with Russia's most important supporters like China and India.
Yeah.
So, maybe if they marched back then in 2014, the public opinion at home would have been happy with that. But they would have marched into war when maybe Russia had military superiority towards Ukraine, but was vulnerable in all kinds of other ways that could have, in the end, weakened Russian standing in the world. So I think that Putin has well earned the confidence as a captain of the ship sailing through a massive storm, that people place their trust in him. And so I think at the moment, it suits Russia to continue winning on the battlefield. I think the kill ratio is now in excess of 20-1. The strategic objective of Russia is denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. That is being achieved. And then, territorial gains. I think it's important to understand that to take control of a territory, you don't necessarily need to conquer it militarily. You don't need, footage of your troops marching into Kiev. It is enough to install a friendly government in Kiev. Yeah. And then that friendly government will do your bidding in Kharkov, in Odessa, wherever. It doesn't matter where you draw the lines. What matters is that the central government in Kiev it realigns with Moscow rather than with the West. So that's the big change that has to happen. And that big change will happen, I think, inevitably.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. Almost completely.
Yeah. One second, please. Alex, I just want to go back to something you said about Trump at the beginning. And listening to you, it just occurred to me, the June deadline, June the 30th is 4 days before July the 4th, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So then it looks like because Trump is much, much smarter than people think, than he's generally presented. So it looks like that he wants it to happen. It could be he wants it to happen to tie in with that celebration, because that would be a major feat. That okay, I got the war done, 250 years independence from the United States, perhaps. And then the other thing you said about Trump there's what he says to the domestic audience, and then what he says elsewhere. But there's what he says, what he shouts and blasts out through speakerphones, his capitalized tweets, and then there's what he really means.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I just want to say that. Vlad, please. Oh, sorry, one more thing. 150,000 Russians dead. Over 1.2 million Ukrainians dead?
Not dead, but out of commission. That's including wounded and missing or in action, and the deserters out of the ranks.
Right, what a loss. What an absolute loss. And for people in the UK, given that our government is supporting this, you may want to go to notaxforwar.com, which shows how we can legally, lawfully, peacefully withhold our taxes as a protest against war, but also as a protest against anything like the paedophile protectors in government. You can use that process. Sorry, a little ad there, Vlad, for something that's very close to my heart.
I'd like to elaborate on what Alex said, which is exactly right. Looking at the Ukrainian dimension, that it is an ultimatum to Zelensky. And so let me just explain a little bit the way I see it from what is going on in Ukraine. And that is that why it is an ultimatum. It's because Zelensky wants to survive until November. And this is his hope, together with his European backers, that if things go his way, Trump is going to lose elections. and the Democrats would control the Congress, and that would mean that Trump will be busy with himself and his survival and fighting impeachment and whatnot, and they would be left alone to carry on, and as long as they could, with the money that the Europeans are going to give him. That is also why the Russians and the Americans are acting together now to force things before June, and how that could be done. And this is where I want to say a couple words about domestic Ukrainian situation. Now, Poroshenko and Klitschko and many other, or several others, Zaluzhny among them, these are all Ukrainian nationalists. They have no warm feelings to Russia, but they want to remove Zelensky. Zaluzhny simply because he wants to be president and fight better than Zelensky does. Poroshenko for the same reason. So these people have been undermining him in all these revelations of corruption. Or they used it all for themselves. Now, the Russians, on the other side, said that they cannot sign anything with Zelensky because his term is out, is already in May, 2 years. He's overstayed his term. And so the only legitimate person who can sign, the Russians are saying, and that's based on the Ukrainian constitution, is the chairman of the Duma, of the Rada, of the parliament. But the current chairman is a non-entity, I forgot his name, but the Arahamia is the chief of the Friends of the People faction, which is Zelensky's political party. And he was the guy who negotiated with the Russians in 2022 in Istanbul and signed the accords which Boris Johnson torpedoed. So he seems to be, I mean, at least that's one of the theory is that Arahamia should replace the current chair of the Rada, and then they announce one day that Zelensky's term is over, and by constitution, he is the guy who is authorized to sign, and they would sign whatever they will prepare to sign as sort of a peace accord, and then, and this is so far, I mean, I'm pretty confident that this has been agreed to with Trump. But after that starts something that I think is in Putin's mind. This is my total speculation, but Trump is not aware of. And what may happen, and I think that's what Putin hopes for, is that as soon as Zelensky is out, then the commitment of various provincial leaders to the regime is gone as well. And that would mean that this is like free for all. And in that case, Odessa People's Republic may choose to quit Ukraine if there's no force that can hold it there. Same thing may happen together with the advancing Russian troops in the Kharkov People's Republic. And that, according to Medvedev, is the ultimate Russian objective. Odessa and Kharkov becomes Russian Federation. The rest of Ukraine, they can leave to the Ukrainians, provided they are friendly. No NATO, no foreign troops, restoration of Russian language, restoration of the church, and then they could do it. And I know one person who openly says that he's ready to do it. That's Mr. Arestovich. He publicly says that that is a good program. He's all in favor of restoring Ukraine and having good relations with Russia. Moreover, another thing that they agreed upon, it seems to me, Trump and Putin, is that there should be a referendum on the provinces, and the current opinion polls in Ukraine show that close to 50% officially, even though now it's considered treasonous, are saying that it's fine to let Donbass go if in return Ukraine is going to get peace and reconstruction. So that seems to be what Trump and Putin may have agreed upon, is this course of action. Zelensky is out, the chair of the Rada signs the peace accord, and then there is a referendum. And after that, who knows which provinces would decide to stay and which not. And then, some kind of accommodation could in fact be worked out by June. It's possible, with these conditions fulfilled. And then Putin would be, not disappointing his nationalist supporters and the army. And at the same time, he could please Trump that the accord is signed and the deal is sealed. And Putin really needs it very much for his domestic audience and for his overall plan. I mean, I'm finishing just to see what Alex said, but it's very important to understand, and the Western audience does not understand it at all. Putin loves having friends in the West. All his life, he was trying to befriend Berlusconi and Schröder and Merkel and Macron, and everybody was his friend at some point. And he now, at the more or less end of his career, a few years more, he's getting older. He put his everything into this idea of making a deal with Trump. So, and officially they put it like Russian-American relations are more important than anything else. And he may be willing to give some compromises on the Ukraine issue and on the, business deals that the Americans may get in the rest around Ukraine. So that's all possible, but he really needs it, and that's in his personality. Like, for example, Medvedev has no commitment like that at all, or other senior people in his administration. They would be much tougher if they were instead of Putin. Putin is still the best deal the Western world has in order to come to some kind of a compromise, unless they want war.
Yeah, Vladimir, thank you so much. And just really appreciate your expertise on the intricacies of Ukraine and Russia. And for people watching, there's two videos that I posted with Vladimir Brovkin. One is about how the Ukrainian war came to pass, that the mainstream media in the UK doesn't tell you. And the other is about the history of Russia since about the 16th century and how Putin came to power and what he represents and what he's done. So I do recommend those for if you want to get some background on Ukraine and Russia. Alex, please.
So I'm just going to share my impression because I'm not aware that anybody said this explicitly, but I have a very strong impression, and I have had since I started my research into all this back around the events in 2014, and when I published my book, Grand Deception, I have a very strong impression that Putin has great clarity about who the actual enemy is, and that the enemy is not the United States or Germany or Russia or even Britain or France, but that the enemy is this global banking oligarchy. Because, throughout the 19th century, the United States and Russia were very close allies and friends. This was part of the American folklore. People aren't necessarily aware of this because it's been scrubbed from the American culture and awareness. But this was the fact throughout the 19th century. And United States and Russia are natural allies because they both have the same enemy. And what we have seen since the end of the 19th century, and especially the early 20th century, that this enemy has been able to burrow their way into American structures of government and financial power, and have been able to draw the United States into its camp by co-opting them through means of, through finance, basically, and turn the United States into the enemy of Russia. And in the same way that they've been able to burrow their way into the American structures of power, they will be able to burrow their way into Russian structures of power once more, when, in the future, you no longer have Vladimir Putin in power, but I don't know, maybe, the Russian people get seduced by some Navalny or Boris Yeltsin or somebody like this. And then again, you end up co-opted, you end up being turned into a vassal of this imperial power, which, is basically headquartered in the city of London and has satellites on Wall Street in Paris, in Frankfurt, in Stockholm, Rome, Vienna, Tokyo, and so forth. And I think that the only way to finally defeat this power is together with the United States, because if Russia throws them out, they remain in the United States as their host. And then when circumstances in Russia change, they'll be getting back into Russia again, and they'll be, buying up banks and media and corporations, making investments and so forth. And boom, in another generation or so, Russia finds itself again the vassal of the Western Empire. So if they're thrown out of Russia, it's not good enough. They have to be thrown out of Russia and the United States, which means that there has to be a revolution in the United States. There has to be, the United States has to nationalize the Federal Reserve Bank. They have to change their monetary system, and they have to kick out the European banking powers from the United States. And I think that for that reason, rather than confronting Western leaders, Putin has been trying to be friendly with them and to co-opt them, to bring them to his side. And he understands that, Germany doesn't have to be Russia's enemy. France doesn't have to be Russia's enemies. What is important is that you cultivate positive relations with all those countries so that you may have influence there, so that you might have business with them, so that you might have business representatives in all those towns. Because after all, all these business representatives and consular personnel, they're also your eyes and ears in these countries. Basically you're turning the British model over against themselves. The other alternative is to turn Russia into an autarky, to simply raise the walls, engage in confrontation, and say, okay, you will stay out, but then you turn into a North Korea, which is also not sustainable. So I think that this is why Putin has been conducting foreign policy in the way that he's been conducting it. I know that in Russia, many people say, many people are mystified by Trump, by Putin's friendliness with the American presidents, all of them, every one of them. He tried to be friendly with Biden even, but this is, I think, the reason. And remember, Putin was the first person to respond after 9/11, called up George Bush, and then sent that beautiful monument to commemorate the victims of 9/11. Of course, the people in power in the United States made sure that this monument was somewhere where nobody will see it, nobody talks about it. But it's a gesture that ultimately might give results. And so I think that he knows what he's doing and why he's doing it. So it's not such a mystery if you have clarity about who your true ultimate enemy is. And I think that Putin understands this. And I'm getting an impression that Trump does as well, that Trump understands this. And this is why I think that the cooperation and coordination between the two governments now is far more extensive than we know.
Exactly.
Well, okay. Thank you, Alex. And it makes me wonder what is happening, what could be going on with Trump and Putin with regards to Iran, which is something we'll be talking about in a subsequent conversation. So please do subscribe, comment, like, and do all that business. Vladimir, the city of London. Do Putin and Lavrov know that that's the real enemy?
Yes, indeed. In fact, I don't know if we have time, but I just wanted to elaborate on what Alex said. I agree completely, but one could say much more. Well, first of all, just a historical note, which is important. I don't know many people know or not that Alexander II, the Russian Tsar, and Lincoln were personal friends. I read some of the letters they wrote to each other. They were buddies. They were really close. And this is actually the background of the sale of Alaska to the United States. But that's just irrelevant. But on the big picture, of course, it is. Russia always viewed America as a partner and as a counterweight to the British Empire. And now, at the time when the Brits are really enemy number one of Russia by their own choosing, and they're all over the place in Ukraine, and despite the nice words between Trump and the British, it is a clash between the two Anglo-Saxon nations. Partly because Trump, as Vance, put it very well, the policies of the globalists in Europe are exactly the opposite of what Trumpism is all about. But, and here I want to come back to what Alex said, and that is Trump and Putin are both against the globalist agenda. That's what makes them work together, hand in hand, fine. Against immigration, against the values, But when the banking thing is concerned, I don't know whether Trump realizes this or not, but both Putin and Xi have created a new kind of capitalism, and that's the kind of capitalism where the big business, and banks and entrepreneurs do what needs to be done for the country and not the other way around. Because American business has been, what's good for business is good for America. And at the time of the robber barons, when everything returned to the United States, it was fine. But when the last half of the 20th century, what was good for business was not good for America. Because what was good for business is take production out where it's cheaper. And the business elite was not helping America, but weakening America through globalization. Globalization was undermining America. And finally comes Trump, who realized that and said, we need production back in America. We need the business do what is good for America. And that is the kind of agenda which is mimicking what Putin has done. This is what I showed in my book on a chapter on Putin, where we discussed it last time. What Putin did, and Alex, I think, talked about it in the same terms, is that he called in the oligarchs and he said, you can keep your money, but you keep out of politics. And if you get into politics, I'll crush you. And he did that with Berezovsky and with Gusinski and Khodorkovsky and others. So, but that's the model. Moreover, in China, it's the same model. The Communist Party is in charge of the capitalists. Now, Stalin shot the capitalists, but the Chinese invented a different way. Why shoot them when they can work for you? As long as you can, set the rules, and then they will do a great job. And I can't resist having one episode, which maybe Alex would enjoy. And that is Deng Xiaoping, who started China on the road of market reforms. What I discovered when I read his biography, which is really interesting for me, because I wrote a book on Russia Russia after Lenin, which was about 1920s. And 1920s is the period of new economic policy, which is Communist Party in charge, but private enterprise flourishes. This was like 10 years when Russia was doing very well. And I explain in my book why Stalin crushed it. But here's the thing. 1924, 25, Deng Xiaoping was in Moscow. He was a student. And he wrote in his memoirs that he loved it. That was my idea, is that market economy under Communist Party rule is the idea that Deng Xiaoping got in the NEP Russia of 1924-25. And then he implemented it with astonishing success, launching on that new kind of a political system. And the last word I want to say, maybe we'll come back to it in some other thing. My view of China is that it's not really a communist China. It's an imperial China. The political culture goes right back to more efficient, more modern, but still imperial system of government like China had for centuries. You can call it Communist Party, you could call it an efficient administration, you can call it whatever you want, but it boils down to one man and then his entourage and the million men belts that move everything in business and society. That's the Communist Party, and that's the way they pretty much restored the Chinese model of efficiency. So that's how I look at the interaction of the three. And of the three, Trump is the weakest. I mean, American business class is by far the strongest, and the deep state is still there, and he has plenty of work to do to make them do what he wants. So he has an uphill battle, Trump, in this regard.
Alex, anything you want to add?
Well, I'm trying to. I can't remember the exact words, but I remember that Susan Kokinda shared with us Trump's speech in Michigan during his election campaign in 2024. I think in October or something. And basically, he said he was asking people to join him, to vote for him, to take up battle against the forces of global financial capitalism, or something to that effect. Global financiers, I think he said. I have that quote somewhere. I wasn't able to find it now, but that quote told me that he knows exactly what he's doing, because it's not something that American voters were asking for. Most American voters are probably not aware. And, if you're going to campaign on obvious issues, it's enough to say, well, I'm not Biden, I'm not Kamala Harris, I'm a different deal, and, Democrats are bad and I'm good. No, the American electorate isn't clamoring for a fight against global financiers. And the fact that Trump said that in an election campaign tells me that he has studied the problem matter very carefully, that he understands exactly what he is up against. And so for that reason, I consider his cooperation with the Russian government now probably a lot more solid than it appears on the surface, which always then brings me back to the, when he says, I'm very disappointed in Vladimir Putin because of this and that. I'm convinced that he's speaking to some domestic audience. And then when he says I'm giving the Russians an ultimatum, he's not giving the Russians the ultimatum. He's just engaging in, typical American trash talk that he probably learned through his career in the media and the World Wrestling Federation, that works for his audience. That's what they like, and we have to recognize that his biggest struggle, his biggest fight is the domestic political fight, because if he loses the midterms, everything is at risk. His whole program is at risk. So I think I believe that that's the correct way to read Trump. And I think that the Russians perfectly understand this. So they don't even, when Trump is doing his antics, they just ignore it. They know that they know what he means and what he doesn't mean.
Yes. Yeah, and no doubt there are back channels of communication between them.
Yes, exactly.
With Witkoff spending 5 hours with Putin's team. Okay. Yeah. All right. Vladimir, Alex, thank you so much. I'll have the links in the description below where people can find you. And I look forward to speaking to you all soon. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Please comment, like, and subscribe. All the best. Bye-bye.